Welcome to the Conversation Lab. I'm Don Schaefer. If democracy begins in conversation, then we need to nurture a culture where ordinary people like us routinely talk about those things that help us understand each other, whether it's about climate, race, religion, gender, or politics. When we're trying to make sense of our city and the world we live in, every question comes with a set of assumptions about the nature of ourselves and our place in a larger world. The Conversation Lab provides a safe place to talk about some of those things. This program is produced by CFRO-FM in Vancouver. It's available on air and online on various platforms, and we appreciate the help of Vancouver's community groups. One of those people that occupies room on my bookshelf as well as my knapsack is Roy Scranton. Roy is the author of War Porn, a searing novel that speaks to the experience of war and the impact it has on all of us. He's also the author of Learning to Die in the Anthropocene, Reflections on the End of Civilization. His journalism, essays, fiction, poetry, and reviews have been published in Rolling Stone, the New York Times, and many other publications. He holds a PhD in English from Princeton and teaches creative writing at Notre Dame. I first encountered Roy's work while attending SFU. That was in 2015, and he's since published a few more books, and not much seems to have changed with the climate change debate. At the time, I was stuck on a question, wondering if when humans entered a space for the first time that had only been enjoyed by other than humans, if it meant that wilderness was gone. Or, as humans, were we part of a larger ecosystem who share all of the planet with everything else, and very much at home in wilderness, regardless of where it is or who got there first. This wilderness theme became a whisper shortly after our cohort's first discussion of Aldo Leopold's A Sand County Almanac, a classic book about conservation. The diverse opinions and viewpoints regarding what wilderness is or isn't continues to be a fascinating rabbit hole for me that's led to interesting existential, political, and economic discussions involving eco and social psychology, religion, power, gender, foreign policy, and centuries of socioeconomic inequalities around the world. Learning to Die in the Anthropocene, Reflections on the End of Civilization, Roy speaks to the depth of the climate change crisis and calls for a reimagined humanism. Having difficult conversations is challenging, and I have to tell you, this is one of the most difficult I've ever had. As COP26 approaches, I hope you'll listen and perhaps consider sharing this episode, just in case Roy might be right. Roy grew up in Oregon. He dropped out of college and spent several years wandering America, and one day found himself driving a Humvee in Iraq. As your journey from wandering America, going to war, and writing about climate change, I'm curious about the transition. Where's the story begin, and what called you to the American service?
Basically, I'm a first-generation college student. I come from a working-class family. You know, there's a tradition of military service in my family, but I went to college, like I said, first-generation college student at University of Puget Sound in Tacoma, and dropped out after the first, I started dropping out in the second semester there for a lot of reasons, to include, my parents were finding it hard to keep up with the payments. I found the student loans I was taking on to be sort of burdensome and threatening. I didn't want to start my life once I got out of college, burdened with this
huge debt.
Crippling debt. Also, I read too much Nietzsche all at once, and also I thought, I was like, well, I want to be a writer is what I want to do, and what I need to learn in order to be a good writer I'm not going to find it in a college classroom. I have to go into the world was my idea. I have to go out and find it, and so I dropped out, and then, wound up working, a succession of minimum wage jobs mostly, and I did some other things. I was a campaign organizer for the PIRGs. I don't know if you have the PIRGs in Canada, but it's I was a grassroots organizer for a left political organization, and I was a breakfast cook, and I was a dishwasher some different places, and I was even I was a phone psychic for a couple days. And I worked with a traveling hot dog stand based out of Fergus Falls, Minnesota, that traveled to rodeos and county fairs and powwows all the way across the plains from Minnesota to Montana. So, and during that time, I was reading and writing and sending stuff out, collecting rejections. I had a stack of rejections that I would, I was like, this will keep me going. The rejection and my desire to prove them wrong. And so I did that and for years, and wound up in Moab, Utah, after a lot of different things, and had a pretty stable life there, a humble life. I worked at a coffee shop and I worked at a bookstore, and I read and I was writing, and that seemed good. But then, and it seemed good enough. There was a small community of writers there, mostly sort of, I guess we would say, amateur writers, but Terry Tempest Williams lived in the next valley over, and she was an important figure in the community, and so it felt good there. And but then three things happened, sort of one right after another, and the things were vastly different scales, but they all sort of bumped me out of that existence. And the first was I had a bike accident and just landed on my face and tore up my lip and broke my teeth, and couldn't afford really to get it fixed. I could afford to do some basic work, but not really replace everything. I didn't have insurance. I didn't have much savings, and I was working part-time minimum wage jobs, and so I was like, oh, this is only sustainable if nothing goes wrong. I need to figure something else out.
That's certainly quite a wake-up call.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah. And then one of the members of the writing group, he was an older guy. He's a former alcoholic, and but he loved Beowulf and he loved Old English. He was going into a movie theater with one of the other writers in the group. They were dating, and he had a heart attack and fell over and died right then. And I was one of the first people at the hospital. I was the first person at the hospital to sort of support the woman who had been with him, but he was already gone, and there was nothing they could do. And that sort of that was a shock just of mortality and how quickly things can change. And then one morning I woke up, a friend had called me and told me to turn on the radio. I didn't have a TV then, because somebody had flown a plane into the World Trade Center. At that point I was like, well, I thought I could sort of escape, I don't know, history and just be in this quiet place, but the world's changing, things are changing. I felt the need to try to re-engage in some way. So I went back to Oregon to be closer to friends and family, to try to figure out a new way forward. I couldn't get a job there because I was, my face was still all messed up, and there was a recession on, and the unemployment was really high. And I sort of kept I told myself I'm not going to apply for food service jobs. That was my one real marketable skill. And I took that off the table for myself, just trying to find some other way forward. Of course, nothing would work, and I wound up in my mom's basement, sort of looking at the future and knowing that the U.S. was going to war, and would not only in Afghanistan, but you could see the signs that we were the government was getting people ready for the idea of Iraq, and like everybody said at the time, everything had changed. So the world had changed, something had changed. And I wanted to understand that. I wanted to see that change, what that meant, on the front lines, what George Orwell called the dirty work of empire. And I also wanted the college money, and I also wanted to get my teeth fixed. And, the Army has decent medical care. All these things sort of came together, and I decided that the best way forward would be to sign up.
I'm really grateful that you shared your story with us. It lays the foundation for this program. It's an interesting path with many expected and I guess unexpected twists and turns. And admittedly, I was curious about what calls young men and women to serve their country. We're speaking with Roy Scranton, author of War Porn, as well as Living and Dying in the Anthropocene. As dying is a central theme in your book, can you talk about the experience of looking in the mirror of your Humvee while driving in Iraq?
Understood. We understand it in the Western philosophical tradition as this idea that the beginning of philosophy is in learning to die, or that that confronting our own mortality and coming to terms with that is the heart and origin of philosophical reflection as such, right? This idea goes back to Plato, and this, of course, has its analogs in Eastern mystical and philosophical traditions, from the Bhagavad Gita to Zen Buddhism, and so that's what I'm drawing on, and it emerges in the book most. I think earliest and most manifestly through a story I tell about being in Iraq and driving my Humvee every day through Baghdad, terrified, watching for snipers and IEDs and ambushes.
That's a term we don't use much here, but for anyone wondering, an IED is an improvised explosive device and most commonly used as a roadside bomb.
The threat of the IED is that you're not going to see it until it blows up. And I drove in the lead Humvee of our convoys because I was the commander's driver, and so every day I would just like grit my teeth and get through it, but it just kept wearing on me, and what I turned to was this book, the Hagakure, which is a 18th century samurai manual written by Yamamoto Tsunetomo, and it's basically like Zen Buddhism for samurais, right? It's like it's like, this is how you live, this is how you think, this is how these are the things you should do to sort of live consciously and ethically and with an awareness in the life of a warrior, right? So it's in a life of constant danger. And one of the key chapters in this book, key for me anyway, is where Tsunetomo argues that, or advocates that the samurai should meditate on death every day. One should imagine oneself being ripped apart by dogs and pierced by arrows and dying of disease and falling from a 1,000-foot cliff and committing seppuku at the death of one's master, and so on and so on. And that by meditation on one's death, by acting as if one is already dead, right, by accepting that death and moving into it, then you can act with freedom. Then you gain freedom in, Tsunetomo says, you gain freedom in the way. You gain freedom in your choices and in what you do, because you're no longer beholden to fear. And I found that extremely helpful and liberating in Baghdad. And years later, when after I'd gotten out of Baghdad and gotten out of the army and gone back to school and was in graduate school at Princeton working on a PhD and writing a dissertation about World War II in American literature.